Commander Elias Vance stood at the edge of the observation deck and watched the twin suns of Draconis, 7 sink below the mountain range. Their orange light painted the alien sky in colors that Earth could never produce. And even after 3 years on this distant world, the sight still made his chest ache with a strange mixture of wonder and loneliness. He was 42 years old, decorated in 3 interstellar conflicts, and stationed on a planet where humanity existed only because the true rulers allowed it. The Virathi were dragons in every sense that mattered, and they had claimed this world long before humans ever dreamed of touching the stars. The Virathi tolerated the human colony the way a lion might tolerate birds picking at its teeth. Useful perhaps, but never equals, never worthy of true respect. They lived for thousands of years and breathed fire hot enough to melt starship hulls. And they looked at humans the way humans might look at mayflies dancing above a summer pond. Elias understood his place here. He kept the peace, managed the small human settlement, and made sure his people never offended their ancient hosts. It was careful work, diplomatic work, and most days it felt like walking on glass while juggling knives. The storm came without warning that night. Draconis 7 was known for its violent weather. But this was something else entirely. The sky turned green and then black, and winds strong enough to lift ground vehicles tore through the valley. Elias ordered everyone into the shelters, and they received a distress signal that made his blood run cold. A Virathi nesting cavern had collapsed on the eastern ridge. Knew he should stay in the shelter. He knew the Virathi would handle their own affairs. He knew that interfering in dragon matters was the fastest way to start an incident that could end the entire human presence on this world. But the signal mentioned eggs. Elias grabbed his thermal suit and emergency kit and ran into the storm before anyone could stop him. The wind hit him like a physical wall, and he had to lean forward at a sharp angle just to make progress. Rain lashed his face and lightning split the sky every few seconds, turning the world into a strobe of white and black. It took him 2 hours to reach the cavern, and what he found there broke something inside him. The entrance had collapsed completely. Tons of rock sealing what had been a sacred nesting site. But there was a crack, a gap barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through, and Elias did not hesitate. He pushed his body into that narrow space and crawled through absolute darkness until he emerged into a chamber lit by dying bioluminescent Massa. Female Virathi lay in the center of the chamber, her massive body crushed beneath a fallen pillar of stone. Her scales were deep purple, almost black, and her eyes found Elias as he stumbled toward her. She was dying, and they both knew it. Around her lay the remains of her nest, broken shells and small still forms that made Elias want to look away. She had tried to protect them, had curled her body around them when the ceiling fell. But stone does not care about love or sacrifice. Human. She rasped, and her voice was like gravel scraping against glass. "Why are you here?" "I heard the signal," Elias said. "I came to help." She laughed, and blood bubbled at her lips. "You cannot help me." "No one can. But there is one." She shifted her wing with tremendous effort, revealing a single intact egg nestled against her side. It was silver and white, pulsing with a faint inner light. "Take her." Elias stared at the egg. "The elders would never allow." "The elders will let her die," the dragon mother snarled. "She is the last of my clutch. She is everything I have left. And I am asking you, human, to save her." The egg was warm when Elias lifted it, warm and heavier than he expected. He cradled it against his chest and felt something pulse within, a heartbeat that was not his own. "She needs heat," the mother whispered. "Constant heat. Skin contact. Do not let her grow cold, human. Promise me." "I promise." The light faded from the dragon's eyes, and Elias was alone with an egg that should not have been his responsibility, and a promise he had no idea how to keep. The Crawl back through the crack was harder with only one arm free, and the storm had not weakened. Elias pressed the egg against his bare chest beneath his thermal suit and walked into the wind. He walked for hours, talked to the egg like it could hear him, told it about Earth and his childhood and the first time he had seen stars from orbit. He was delirious by the time he reached the shelter, hypothermic and barely conscious. But the egg was still warm. It hatched 3 days later. Elias woke to a strange sensation, something rough and warm pressing against his cheek. He opened his eyes and found himself staring into another pair of eyes, silver and ancient and impossibly intelligent for something that had been alive for only minutes. The dragonling was the size of a large cat, her scales pale silver with hints of white at the edges. Her wings were folded against her body, and her tail curled around his arm like she was afraid he might disappear. She made a sound, something between a chirp and a growl, and pressed her head against his chest. Ez reached out with trembling fingers and touched her snout. "Hello there," he whispered. "Hello, Kira." The name came from nowhere and everywhere, felt right in a way he could not explain. Kira chirped again and climbed onto his shoulder, her small claws pricking through his shirt. She wrapped her tail around his neck and settled there like she had always belonged. The Varathi elders arrived within the hour, and their fury shook the walls of the medical bay. A dragon had bonded with a human, an abomination, a perversion of everything their species held sacred. They demanded the creature be surrendered immediately for re-education, but when they tried to take Kira, she screamed. The sound was not loud in the physical sense, but it resonated at frequencies that made bones ache and teeth hurt and hearts skip. Kira buried her face against Elias's neck and screamed her terror and her refusal, and even the elders took a step back. "She is bonded," one of them hissed. "Truly bonded. This should not be possible." Elias held his dragon and met the elder's eyes without flinching. "I made a promise to her mother," he said quietly. "I intend to keep it." The elder stared at him for a long moment. This fragile human who dared to stand against creatures that could incinerate him with a breath. And perhaps it was that defiance, that stubborn, impossible courage that made her pause. "Very well," she said at last. "Keep your abomination, human. But know this, you have started something that cannot be undone. The galaxy will remember this day." Elias looked down at Kira, at her silver eyes watching him with absolute trust, and smiled. "Let them remember." The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass, and within weeks, every species with access to interstellar communication knew about the human who had bonded with a dragon. Scientists from 12 different worlds requested permission to study the phenomenon. Journalists camped outside the human settlement, and the Varathi elders debated endlessly about what this meant for their ancient traditions. Kira grew fast in those first months, faster than anyone expected. She went from the size of a cat to the size of a horse in just 90 days, and her appetite grew with her. She ate enough meat to feed 10 humans and still seemed hungry, but she would not eat unless Elias was present. If he left the room, she would push her food away and wait, no matter how long it took. This is abnormal behavior, Dr. Cirrus noted during one of many observation sessions. She was Varathi herself, young by dragon standards at only 400 years, and she had volunteered to study the bond against the wishes of her family. Varathi young are independent feeders by their second week. They do not require the presence of their bond parent to eat. Elias watched Kira tear into a side of synthetic beef and shrugged. "Maybe she just likes the company." "Commander, you do not understand," Cirrus said, and her golden eyes were troubled. "Varathi imprinting is supposed to be species-locked. Our genetics contain specific markers that trigger the bond response, markers that humans simply do not possess. What you have done should be impossible, but the brain scans told a different story when Cirrus ran neural imaging on both Elias and Kira. She found something that made her drop her datapad and stare at the screens in silence for nearly 10 minutes. Kira's neural pathways had not just accepted Elias as her bond parent. They had woven themselves completely around his biological signature. His heartbeat, his voice patterns, his emotional fluctuations. His very brain waves, all of it had been encoded into her developing mind at a level deeper than instinct. She is not bonded to you as a Virathy would be bonded to another Virathy, Cirrus finally said. She is bonded to you more completely, more permanently. I have never seen readings like this in my entire career. That was strange enough. But what Cirrus discovered next changed everything. Elias's brain had changed to human neuroplasticity, was well documented across the galaxy. Most species considered it a weakness, a sign of biological immaturity, a quirk that came from having such short lifespans that evolution never bothered to lock in permanent structures. But those same flexible pathways had done something remarkably. Elias's mind had adapted to the bond. He could feel Kira now, even when she was not in the room. When she was happy, warmth spread through his chest. When she was frightened, his hands trembled and his pulse quickened. When she was curious, his thoughts raced in directions they had never gone before. They were connected in a way that no human had ever been connected to anything. Your species, Cirrus said slowly, almost reverently. You are not limited by your biology the way we are. You can become things you were not designed to be. You can change. Is that good or bad? Cirrus looked at Kira, who had finished her meal and was now curled around Elias's legs like a massive scaly dog. I honestly do not know. The other Virathy were less uncertain in their opinions. To most of them, the bond was a corruption, proof that humans were dangerous parasites who could infect even the most sacred aspects of dragon culture. Some called for Kira to be killed. Others demanded that Elias be executed and the bond broken through his death. The elders debated and argued while Kira grew and the bond deepened by her first birthday. Kira was the size of a small shuttlecraft, her silver scales gleaming in any light. Her wings spanning 15 meters when fully extended. She could breathe fire hot enough to melt steel and fly fast enough to break the sound barrier. But she still followed Elias everywhere like a lost puppy. You are making our people nervous, Elder Vraxis told Elias one evening. The old dragon was massive, scarred from ancient wars, and his eyes held the weight of 2,000 years. A dragon that powerful should not be so attached to something so fragile. I am not fragile. Elias replied. Vraxis laughed, but it was not a kind sound. Human, I could kill you with a sneeze. Your entire species could be wiped from existence by a single determined dragon clan. You live for what, 80 years? 100 if you are lucky? You are already middle-aged. In dragon terms, you are practically dead already. Kira growled, low and dangerous, and smoke curled from her nostrils. Vraxis took a step back despite himself. She does not like it when people threaten you, he observed. No, she does not. This bond of yours, Vraxis said thoughtfully. It truly goes both ways? Elias nodded. I feel what she feels. She feels what I feel. When she's hurt, I hurt. When I am happy, she is happy. Then you understand the danger, Vraxis said. You are mortal, Commander. One day you will die. And when you do, what will happen to her? It was a question that haunted Elias in the quiet hours of the night, when Kira slept coiled around his quarters and he lay awake staring at the ceiling. Virathy could live for thousands of years. He had maybe 40 left if he was lucky. What would happen to Kira when he was gone? But those worries felt distant during the day, when Kira would nudge him awake with her snout and chirp excitedly about whatever adventure she had planned. She learned to speak within her first year. Her voice a rumbling purr that vibrated through his bones. Elias, she would say. Let us fly today, and they would fly. Elias strapped to her back as she soared through the alien sky of Draconis 7. And in those moments, nothing else mattered. Not the politicians and the scientists and the elders with their endless debates. Not the whispers and the stares and the hatred. Just the wind and the clouds and the feeling of being exactly where they belonged. The galaxy watched and waited and wondered what this strange partnership would become. Some saw hope, a bridge between species that had never truly understood each other. Others saw doom, a breaking of natural order that could only end in tragedy. Only Kira and Elias knew the truth. They were family now, bound in ways that transcended biology and politics and the expectations of a galaxy that had never seen anything like them. And whatever came next, they would face it together. That was the only thing that mattered. The Nexer Collective arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning, and the galaxy would never be the same again. They came through fold space in ships that looked like nightmares made solid, twisted amalgamations of metal and flesh that screamed as they moved. The Nexer were not a species in any normal sense. They were a hive mind, billions of individual units, connected to a single vast intelligence that saw organic life as nothing more than raw material to be harvested and absorbed. The first colony they hit was a small human world called New Geneva. They killed everyone in 6 hours and converted the biomass into more of themselves. The second target was a Virethi outpost that had stood for 3,000 years. It fell in 2 days, and for the first time in recorded history, dragons knew the taste of true fear. Draconis 7 prepared for war. Elias was 47 now, still strong, but feeling age creep into his joints on cold mornings. Kira had grown into her full adult form, a magnificent creature of silver scales and white fire, larger than most Virethi her age and faster than all of them. When she flew, she left a trail of light across the sky that people said looked like a comet. The Virethi military wanted to separate them, to assign Kira to a dragon squadron and Elias to human command. They refused, and the argument that followed nearly split the alliance apart. She fights with me or she does not fight at all, Elias said flatly. That is not negotiable. You are being irrational, General Craxus snarled. This is war, not some bonding ceremony. We need every dragon at full combat effectiveness. And Kira is most effective when she fights beside me. They proved it in the first battle. The Nexer hit Draconis 7 with a force that should have overwhelmed the defenders within hours. Their ships darkened the sky, and their ground units swarmed like locusts made of knives and hatred. The Virethi met them with fire and fury, but found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. The ancient dragon tactics, unchanged for millennia, were being predicted and countered by the Nexer hive mind. Then Elias and Kira joined the fight. They moved like a single entity, 2 minds sharing one purpose. Elias spotted patterns in the Nexer behavior that the dragons missed, weaknesses in their formations, hesitations in their advance. He whispered tactics to Kira, and she executed them with devastating precision. Where other dragons fought alone, relying on individual strength, Kira fought smart, using terrain and timing and the kind of flexible thinking that humans had, developed through millennia of fighting things bigger and stronger than themselves. They broke the Nexer assault on the eastern ridge and turned what should have been a massacre into a routeward spread quickly through the allied forces. The human and his dragon were something new, something the galaxy had never seen. They combined human adaptability with Virethi power, human cunning with dragon fury. They were unstoppable. Other pairs began to form in the months that followed. Young Virethi, who had watched Kira and Elias, volunteered for experimental bonding programs, and humans across the sector stepped forward to meet them. Not every bond was as deep as the original, but even partial connections proved devastating on the battlefield. Human dragon squadrons tore through Nexer formations like fire through paper, the war turned slowly in their favor. One bloody victory at a time, but the Nexer learned too. They began targeting the bonds specifically, studying captured pairs to understand how the connection worked and how to destroy it. They're scientists, if those writhing biological computers could be called scientists. Developed a new weapon, a bioagent designed to attack neural pathways, to burn out the connections that made the bonds possible. Elias never saw the strike coming. They were on the ground after a successful raid, celebrating with the other pilots when the Nexer drones slipped through the perimeter defenses. It was small, no bigger than a bird, and it moved too fast for anyone to react. It reached Elias and dissolved against his skin, releasing its payload directly into his bloodstream. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced. It felt like his brain was being torn apart strand by strand, like fire was burning through every neural pathway that connected him to Kira. He collapsed screaming and could not stop. Kira felt him dying. She was 200 meters away, talking with another dragon, when the bond suddenly flooded with agony. She did not run to him. She flew, her wings snapping open and carrying her across the distance in a heartbeat. She landed beside him and wrapped her body around his, her wings creating a cocoon that blocked out the rest of the world. "Elias," she cried, and her voice broke in ways that dragon voices were not supposed to break. "Elias, stay with me." But he was slipping away. She could feel the bond fraying, feel the warmth of his mind growing cold, feel the connection that defined her entire existence being torn to pieces by something she could not fight. So she did something impossible. Kira reached deep inside herself, into the core of fire that powered every dragon, and she pushed. She pushed her own life force through the bond, sending waves of energy and warmth and desperate love into Elias's failing body. She gave him pieces of herself, fragments of her own neural patterns to replace the ones being destroyed. Her scales began to change color as she poured herself into him. The silver faded to white, then to gray, as her life force drained. She did not stop. She could not stop. Losing him was not an option she was willing to accept. The medics found them hours later, still wrapped together, both barely alive. They had to pry Kira's wings open to reach Elias, and when they did, they found something miraculous. He was still breathing. Elias spent 3 weeks in a coma, while his body healed and his mind rebuilt itself around the new patterns Kira had given him. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Kira's face, pale and exhausted but alive. "You stupid dragon," he whispered. "You almost killed yourself." She pressed her snout against his hand and closed her eyes. "I would do it again," she said. 1,000 times. 1,000,000 times. "You are worth it." The doctors told him later that part of Kira now lived inside him, that her sacrifice had fundamentally changed his biology in ways they did not fully understand. He was still human, mostly. But there was something else there too now, something dragon, something that would connect them forever. He looked at his partner, at the creature who had given pieces of her own soul to save him, and felt tears roll down his cheeks for the first time in 20 years. "Thank you," he said. Kira smiled. And even though dragon faces were not designed for smiling, Elias understood perfectly. "Always," she replied. "Now and forever." The war ended on a morning so quiet that Elias almost did not believe it was real. The Nexer collective had been shattered, broken by the combined might of species that had learned to fight together instead of alone. Human-dragon pairs had led the final assault on the hive core, and when it fell, the galaxy breathed a sigh of relief that echoed across 1,000 worlds, but victory came with a price. The doctors delivered their verdict in a small white room while Kira waited outside. They spoke in careful medical terms, talked about neural degradation and cellular damage, and the long-term effects of the bioweapon that had nearly killed him. Elias listened to all of it with the same calm he had carried into every battle of his life. How long? He asked when they finished. The lead physician hesitated. 2 years at most. Possibly less. The damage is too extensive. Your neural tissue is breaking down, and there is nothing we can do to stop it. Ilias nodded and thanked them for their honesty and walked out of the room to face his dragon. Kira knew before he said anything. She had felt the spike of fear and grief through their bond, had felt the way his heart stuttered when the words hit him. Her silver eyes faded now to a pale gray from her sacrifice, filled with a pain that made Elias want to look away. "Tell me," she said. So he told her, and watched her world fall apart. The Virathi elders came to him 3 days later with an offer they considered a great honor. They would give him a mercy death, a peaceful end attended by the highest members of Dragon Society. His name would be carved into their sacred stones, remembered forever as the human who had changed everything. It was more than any alien had ever been offered. Ilias refused without hesitation. "I am not done yet," he said. "There is still time, and I intend to use every second of it." Kira threw herself into finding a cure with a desperation that frightened everyone who knew her. She flew across star systems, demanded audiences with the greatest scientists of a dozen species, offered everything she had in exchange for a solution. She barely slept, barely ate, and when Elias tried to slow her down, she looked at him with eyes that burned with something between love and madness. "I will not let you die," she said. "I refuse, Kira. No. You saved me when I was an egg. You held me against your heart and kept me warm when my mother died. You gave me a name and a home and a purpose. I'm not ready to lose you. I will never be ready." But the months passed and no cure came. Elias grew weaker as his body slowly failed. The tremors started in his hands and spread to his arms. His memory began to slip, moments and names disappearing like morning fog. Through it all, Kira stayed at his side, her massive body curled around his quarters like a wall against the universe on his last night. Kira carried him to a cliff overlooking the nebula where they had fought their first battle together. The war had started here, and somehow it felt right that his story should end in the same place. The nebula glowed in shades of purple and gold, and the stars beyond it sparkled like diamonds scattered across. Black velvet. Elias leaned against Kira's side and watched the sky and felt peace settle over him like a warm blanket. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer." Kira lowered her great head until her eyes were level with his. They were wet, and Elias realized with a start that dragons could cry after all. "You stayed long enough," she said, and her voice came through the bond as much as through the air. "You taught us so much. You taught me so much. What did I teach you?" Kira was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "You taught us that strength is not about living forever. It is about what you protect while you are alive. You taught us that short lives can burn so bright that they leave marks that last for eternity. You taught me what love means." Elias felt tears on his own cheeks, and he did not bother to wipe them away. "I was just trying to keep a promise. You did more than that. You changed everything. Human-dragon bonds exist across the galaxy now because of what we built together. Species that hated each other are learning to work together because they saw us. You did not just keep a promise, Elias. You changed history." He laughed weakly. "I was just a soldier who found an egg. You were my father," Kira said simply. "You were my partner. You were my soul. And you always will be." His breath was getting shallow now, each inhale a struggle. The stars seemed brighter than before, closer somehow, like they were reaching down to meet him. He lifted his hand and placed it on Kira's snout, feeling the warmth of her scales one last time. "Take care of yourself," he whispered. "Take care of our family. All the bonded pairs out there, they're your family now. Watch over them for me. I will. And don't be sad forever. Find joy. Live." "That's an order." Kira let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "Yes, Commander. Elias smiled and closed his eyes and let the universe carry him away. His heart stopped beating just as the first sun rose over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Kira felt the bond go still and waited for the emptiness to swallow her. Waited for the agony of severance that every Virathi feared more than death itself. But it did not come. She could still feel him. It was faint, like an echo in a vast empty hall, but it was there, a warmth in her chest that refused to fade, a presence that should have been impossible. Their bond had been so deep, so completely intertwined, that death itself could not sever it completely. Elias Vance was gone, but some part of him remained. Woven into her soul like threads of gold in a tapestry, Kira sat with his body until the suns reached their peak. And then she lifted her head and roared her grief and her love and her gratitude into the sky. The sound echoed across the mountains and rolled over the colony and reached every ear on the planet, every dragon, and every human stopped what they were doing and listened. They knew what that sound meant. They knew a hero had fallen, and they knew that his partner would carry his memory until the stars themselves grew cold. 300 years passed like waves against the shore, each one carrying away a little more of the world that Elias had known and leaving behind something new and strange and beautiful. Kira became a legend in that time, a figure so famous that children across the galaxy grew up hearing stories about the silver dragon who had loved a human. She served as the first Virathi ambassador to humanity, standing before councils and governments with Elias's medal around her neck and his memory burning in her heart. She brokered treaties that ended centuries of mistrust and built bridges between species that had once considered each other enemies. "How do you do it?" a young human diplomat asked her once, after watching her calm a room full of angry politicians with nothing but words. "How do you always know what to say?" Kira smiled in her dragon way and touched the metal with her claw. "I had a good teacher. She never took another bond partner, though many offered." Young Virathi came to her with hopeful eyes, having heard the stories of what a true bond could be, and she turned them all away gently but firmly. Humans approached her too, brave souls who thought perhaps they could fill the space Elias had left, and she sent them away with kindness and sadness in her voice. "I am already bonded," she would say. "I will always be bonded." They did not understand, but how could they? They could not feel what she felt, the constant presence in her chest that pulsed with warmth even after 3 centuries. They could not hear the gentle whispers that came to her in moments of doubt, the echoes of a voice she had loved more than life itself. The galaxy changed around her in ways that would have amazed Elias. Human-dragon bonds became common, spreading across settled space until it was strange to find a major colony without at least one bonded pair. Other species began experimenting too, forming connections that previous generations would have considered impossible. The old barriers were falling one by one, and something new was rising in their place. Scholars studied the phenomenon and gave it a name, the Vance resonance. They discovered that human emotional bonds could imprint permanently on longer-lived species, that the fierce burning love of humanity's brief lives could leave marks that lasted for millennia. Humans loved so intensely, it turned out, precisely because they knew they did not have much time. They poured everything they had into their connections, holding nothing back. And that total commitment created something that transcended normal biology. "You changed everything," Elder Vraxis told Kira at his retirement ceremony. He was ancient now, over 3,000 years old, and his scales had faded to a dull brown. "When that human bonded with you, I thought it was a mistake that would destroy us. I was wrong. It was the best thing that ever happened to our species." Kira touched her metal again. "He would have been embarrassed to hear you say that." "Yes, he probably would have. Humans are strange that way. They do impossible things and then act surprised when everyone makes a fuss. That was part of what made him special. That was part of what made all of them special. Vraxis agreed. We lived for thousands of years and thought that made us superior. But they burn for decades and leave marks that last forever. Perhaps the real wisdom is in knowing that time is not the same as impact. Kira thought about that conversation often in the centuries that followed. She watched generations of humans be born and grow and age and die, each one leaving their own marks on the galaxy. She watched their children take up the bonds their parents had forged, continuing the work of building connections across species lines. She watched the universe become something kinder and brighter and more connected than it had been when she was young, and through it all, she felt Elias with her, not words exactly, but impressions, emotions, gentle nudges in moments when she needed guidance, warmth when she was cold, calm when she was afraid, amusement when she lost her temper, which happened less often as the centuries rolled by, but never stopped entirely. He was there, always there, woven so deeply into her being that she could not tell where she ended and he began. She never told anyone about this. They would have thought she was losing her mind, imagining things in her grief. But she knew the truth. Their bond had been so complete, so total, that it had become something beyond what either of their species understood. Death was supposed to end all things. But love, it turned out, had other plans on her final day. Kira returned to the cliff where Elias had died. She was ancient now, older than Vraxis had been, and her scales had faded from silver to pale gray. Her wings no longer caught the wind the way they once had, and her fire had dimmed to barely a flicker. But her mind was clear, and the warmth in her chest burned as strong as ever. The nebula looked the same as it had 3 centuries ago, purple and gold and infinite. The stars sparkled like diamonds, and the twin suns painted the sky in shades that still took her breath away. She settled onto the rock where Elias had taken his last breath and closed her eyes. I kept my promise, she whispered to the wind. I took care of our family. I lived. I found joy. Are you proud of me? The warmth in her chest pulsed, and she felt something that might have been an answer, something that felt like love and pride and endless patience. He had been waiting, she realized. All this time, all these centuries, he had been waiting for her. I'm ready now, she said. I'm ready to come home. The warmth expanded, filling her entire body, and Kira felt her eyes grow heavy. She did not fight it. She had lived longer than most dragons ever dreamed, had accomplished more than anyone could have predicted for a silver hatchling who had bonded with a human soldier, had changed the galaxy in ways that would echo through eternity. But the best part of her existence had been a few short decades with a man who had held her egg against his heart and promised a dying mother that he would keep her safe. She closed her eyes and let go, and there he was. Elias stood before her in that vast warm light, young again, smiling that crooked smile she had loved so much. He opened his arms and she went to him, and for the first time in 300 years, the ache in her soul finally stopped. I waited for you, he said. I knew you would come. I never doubted you would be here, she replied. You always kept your promises. He laughed and hugged her, and she was small again, small enough to curl around his shoulders the way she had when she was a hatchling. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, letting centuries of separation melt away. Ready? He finally asked, for what? For whatever comes next. Together this time. Really together, Kira smiled. I have been ready since the moment I hatched. They walked into the light side by side, the human and his dragon, the soldier and his family. Behind them, the galaxy they had helped build continued to spin, full of bonds and bridges and connections that would never have existed without their love. And somewhere, on a cliff overlooking a nebula, people still told stories about the dragon baby who refused to leave her human. Even when death tried to part them, some stories They said, are too beautiful to end. This one never did.